doing okay? Let's stand together and worship. Sing with us. You make the darkness running high. You bring the broken back to life. Only you can, only you can. You set me free from every chain. You set my heart with songs of praise. Only you can, only you can. Jesus, you're the only reason that I'm even breathing. I am wide awake. My heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to your rhythm, to your rhythm. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling. I know. Come on. You left the glory of your throne to bring this runaway back home. Only you can, only you can. You give me love, you give me life, you keep me dancing through the night. Only you can, only you can. My heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to your rhythm, to your rhythm. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Oh, church, sing it again. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. All right, let's put those hands together. Come on. You guys sound good, by the way. Jesus, you're the only reason that I'm even breathing. I am wide awake. You move me, your freedom is consuming. I feel it rushing through me. I'll never be the same. My heart beats only for your glory. My hands reach up for you to hold me. My soul sings, Father, you are holy. My feet dance to your rhythm, to your rhythm. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Come on, sing it again. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name. Every beat is calling, every beat is calling out your name.
Oh, good morning, Casas. We're awake now, aren't we? What a great way to start. So good to be with you all here today, whether you're in the room or watching us online. Just thanks so much for making this part of your day. And if you are new with us, we'd love to just reach out to you and say hello, and just to say thank you. And so there's going to be a QR code pop up on the screen. You can point your smartphone camera at that. It'll take you to a bunch of buttons, and there's one in there that says I'm new. And if you just click on that and just let us know that you're here, we'd love to just send you a gift this coming week. And I promise, like, no robocalls, no spam email, nothing like that. So, but just thank you for joining us and being with us. So let's get back to worship.
Jesus, there's just something
trust in you. There is hope in the promise of the cross. You gave everything to save the world you love. And this hope is an anchor for my soul. My God will stand
can take a seat. All our hope is in him. Well, as we continue in worship, we're going to enter into a time of giving. And there's a few ways you can do that now since we're not passing plates in the room. You can always mail in a check or a gift into the church office during the week. We've got some boxes and envelopes in the back of the room if you're here in the room. And for those of you online and also in the room, you can use that same QR code that we popped up earlier and go to that same menu of options and click give on that. And so let me just pray for our morning and pray for our gifts. God, thank you so much just for such a beautiful day and that we can gather together and worship you. It's such a special time that we can spend together. Regardless of where we are united together in you. And I thank you for these gifts. Thank you for the faithfulness that our community shows. And I just ask for your blessing on those gifts and just multiply them beyond any of our imagination. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
I grew up in a family that was predominantly Catholic, but my dad converted to Judaism when I was 7. And so it was this super weird household where my mom kind of called herself the non-practicing Catholic, my dad who would go to synagogue every Saturday, and then me who's just kind of stuck in this, we'll drop you off at church and you can go do your own thing. And then I grew up with friends who didn't go to church, went to church, all these different, ideas and ways that they lived. Growing up, I remember I'd have feelings about kind of where was I supposed to be and who was I supposed to be. I was just always kind of confused. Where do I belong? What am I here for? I remember whenever I'd go to Mass on Sundays, it was always just this, you go because you have to go, and you go because you feel guilty. Now I'm doing this, now we have to do this prayer, now you have to go pray, now sit down, stand up, all these things, and you're just doing it not because you feel like you have this relationship with God. I don't remember having a relationship with God. God was someone who you feared. Jesus was kind of something I remember I didn't hear about. This, you need to repent in order to earn God's love. If I don't do these things, then I'm not going to be loved. And so it was trying to figure out what does that really look like, and why are these things I have to do in order to have this relationship with God. When I started coming to Casas in high school, and then once I graduated high school, I kind of left behind where I'd been going before and all of those ideas mostly, and shifted to here full time. And then I started working with the middle school ministry. I never grew up really understanding that you could have a relationship with Jesus, because it was always just God. And so it was just this eye-opening thing for me coming here and experiencing this idea of you are loved no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter how you look, it doesn't matter. You can have a relationship with Jesus. When I realized I can have that relationship with Jesus, it was this huge kind of weight just lifted off my shoulders. Don't have to go and, pray because I'm holding on to this guilt. Of course, prayer is great and it helps, but I'm not doing it because I feel guilty. It's a way to talk to God now, and it's a way for me to form that relationship. So So a really hard moment for me was when I was 29, and it was the day before my 30th birthday, and my dad died. And then it was also 11 days before Christmas. And so I was volunteering here for Christmas at Casas. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love doing it. It's a ton of fun. I love making people laugh. And I remember getting a text, and they were like, don't worry about it. We know we asked you to head this up. You don't need to come in. You don't need to, be a part of this. And I remember it was 2 days after, and I was just like, why wouldn't I go? What are you talking about? And they're like, well, your dad just passed away. Why would you want to come in? And I'm like, because that's my family. Like, I need that support. I want to be there. My dad and I had a really good relationship, even though we had different faiths. Being here on like Christmas Eve and doing all the Christmas Eve services, that is exactly where I was supposed to be. And that is exactly where he wanted me to be. And so, I'm running around doing all this stuff, having fun, playing with, kids and all this stuff and taking pictures. And I oddly remember that time as just so much fun. And there were these moments where I was just like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is my family. This is so, this is it. So once my dad passed away, I really do believe that the way I handled it and the way I looked at it would have been so different if I hadn't been here and I had still been in the Catholic faith. I don't think there would have been a group for me to have because I didn't have that even when I was going. So I think had I not had that relationship with God, I think I honestly would have just been so angry and just so mad and just kind of in this place of not accepting it and being, just bitter and holding on to it for a long time. And now that I have that relationship, I can kind of be like, can you show me or explain to me what this is? And it's almost these times where it makes more sense now. So I can have those conversations and I'm totally in a better place where I can talk about it and I have that community that surrounds me and that, will be there. I don't hold on to things anymore, really. And if I do, then that's when I'm like, okay, there's something deeper. Let's talk about this. Just a sense of relief was really what I felt. I wish I had known growing up, it's okay to love everybody. If I could talk to my younger self, it would be the exact same thing I tell all of my middle school kids, and it is, you are loved no matter what, and you need to love others.
I love Vanessa's story for so many reasons, about how you can find family here. Doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your upbringing is, it doesn't matter what your background is. You can come and be a part of this community and be accepted and belong and loved, just as you are, wherever you are. And that's such a huge value for us, to just be you. And you're a beautiful expression of who God made you to be. And to be able to find a relationship with Christ here is just, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. And even to be able to find a place to serve and volunteer, talking about how she's working with our kids, to help them love like we're loved. And Easter is coming up in a couple of weeks. And there's a couple of ways that you could step into that kind of role and find some of that serving opportunity for Easter. We've got a couple of things that you could volunteer to do, and you can use that same QR code that we've talked about already. And once you go to that link, you'll see a list of buttons, and right up at the top says Volunteer at Easter. And there's a few different ways that you can do that, primarily with our kids and our children's area. But we would love for you to just be able to do that. And then the second way that you can help is that second button down below is about Easter tickets, because we want to make sure we have enough space for all three services for all of us, as well as all of our guests that are going to come. So again, services Saturday night, 6 p.m., and then Sunday morning at 9:15 and 11. And all three of those are going to be streamed as well, and will be in person here. And so let's make a space for another Vanessa and just show somebody how much they're loved and that they can be accepted and belong in a new family that maybe they've never had before. So Glenn's going to come out and continue our series on There's Just Something About Jesus.
Well, good morning. It's good to see you. Oh, you can do better than that. Good morning. Great to have you here and all of you who are online. Great to have you. And as Miles was saying, we're in this series, Something About Jesus, and we're looking at just like some aspect of Christ's life that we can appreciate or see, but something that would affect us, something that we can incorporate, just looking at him as a model in this. And what I want to look at here this morning is Jesus had this way of being with God that got played out in his prayer life, where in some ways he broke a number of norms around prayer. And I want to look at this way of being that he had with this, because I think there are some things that we can come to understand about prayer that would impact us in a really, really good way. I want to, just to give you an example of one of these with Christ, there's a passage in the Gospel of Mark. This won't be the main passage we look at this morning, but in Mark chapter 1, and if you want to look or read on with me, you can. Mark chapter 1, here's an example, verse 35. It says this: very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." It's kind of like, what are you doing, Jesus? You can't be running off and praying like this. You need to be here, right? And we read that, and it seems really normal to us. But remember, so much of how they would have understood a prayer would have been like with a whole system that they would have understood, connected with the synagogue. And Jesus, he just kind of breaks that. And there's this thing that you see, and you see lots and lots of examples of this throughout the New Testament. And he had this way to him where it was natural. And it was a way of being. And for us, sometimes when we think about prayer, we think of it as the thing that we should do. We think of it as the thing that we ought to do in this. And I don't know that Jesus thought of it exactly that way. I don't think there was a moment where he's just like, well, after all, I am the Messiah. I should probably go out and, get up before everyone else to pray, because, that's what the Messiah should do. And I'll go do that. What if it was the most natural thing in the world for Jesus to go and pray, and even the way he was praying, there was something natural about it, of just being present with God in some way that sometimes gets missed on us, because so often we think of it as the thing of okay, I want to be a good Christian, and I should pray. That's the thing I should do. I should go pray. Kind of no one goes, I haven't had dessert in a long time. I should probably go have some dessert, right? It's just no, you're probably going I kind of want to have some dessert. What if there was an aspect of prayer where it was just there's something I'm compelled to, there's something I want in this? Because sometimes I think that gets missed these days when we think of this. And Jesus, he just had this way of being with it. Oftentimes you see prayer in our culture as the kind of thing where we're drawn to it, right? There are moments when we're really drawn to it. And when do we most likely get drawn to prayer? When we're kind of at the end of our rope, something's wrong. And it's just okay, now it's I feel like praying right now, right? I was on a flight coming into LAX, and we were kind of I don't know what you call it, final approach or something. It wasn't like we were all, seat belted in yet, but it was the announcement and get ready, and the what are the people that come by and help? I couldn't hear anything you all said. I heard the flight attendants. Thank you. Yes. I am sharp this morning, let me tell you. Right? Yeah, the flight attendants, they're coming by and getting the trash and stuff. And all of a sudden, the plane, it's the bottom fell out from underneath it. Have you ever been in it? How many of you have ever been in a plane where it just, okay, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, where it just starts losing lots of altitude really fast. So fast that, they were saying, when you get a chance, put your tray table up. I didn't need to put my tray table up. It put itself up, right? All the stuff on my tray table was floating in front of me. And I can laugh about this now, but when it happened, it wasn't so funny. There was a guy several rows in front of me. He was standing up and trying to put his bag back in the overhead compartment when all of this happened. And he literally flew up in the air, and he had his bag, and his eyes get like this big, and he's just like, and he shoves his bag in there and goes to slam the thing closed, and he's in the air, like he's floating in the air. And it's just like, I just need to get my bag in there, And he couldn't quite get it closed right before it's like we caught some air. And we all went like, everything just went down to the ground. And he goes to the ground, the thing flops open, the bag comes up. But luckily, right before it hit him in the head, we lose altitude again, and he goes flying back up in the air, catches his bag on the way up, throws it back in the thing, goes to close it, and then wham, we all go back. And he didn't get that door closed yet, right? The bag comes out, and I'm watching this happen, like 3 times this happened. Finally, on the last one, he goes flying up in the air, and he gets it this time. Like, he's up in the air, he's like, slams that thing shut, and then we all come down, right? Let me tell you, after that happened, right, and the stewardess or the flight attendant was right next to me, and she's on the ground, and she's got herself pinned against the aisle with her arms up against, like she's trained for this or something. We're all looking around. Let me tell you, everyone was praying in that plane right then. I mean, it's just like, the president is like, it wasn't like, should I pray right now? I said, God, get me through this, right? Like everyone was motivated to pray, right? There's this part of us where we're wired to pray, especially in moments where we feel like we're at the end of our rope. Ever have a moment where you were at the end of your rope? Maybe it wasn't a sudden thing. Maybe you found yourself at a point like there was a health issue or a financial issue or a relational issue, and you found yourself just drawn to prayer because you felt like you were at the end of your rope, right? And it was the thing that you needed to do. And while I definitely do not want to discourage that, because that is a good thing, and I think God welcomes that. There was something about Christ in his prayer life that he saw prayer as something more than just something that he engaged at moments where there was a crisis or where he felt like he was at the end of his rope. There was something far more to it, right? And I want to get at that this morning, because here's what I would love. I would love for you all to come to experience prayer more and more as not just a religious activity that you do, because I don't think Jesus saw it that way, but more as a way of being with God, something that is actually natural and that you're drawn to in a different kind of way, because I think that's what Christ modeled for us. So here's what I want to do. I want to actually look at a passage here where Jesus teaches on this. So if you have your Bibles, here's the main passage that I want us to go over here this morning. It's found in Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. I'm going to start in verse 5. And what I love about this is I think Jesus is teaching us about prayer, but he's teaching us about how he thinks of prayer, how he enters into, like we're learning something about what he modeled all throughout the Gospels in this. So look with me at this, Matthew chapter 6, and if you're still looking for it, it's the first book in the New Testament, all right? Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, it says this. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Now, before I break this down, just real quickly here. It's really important to understand the teaching aim that Jesus is using at any point that he's teaching. And you'll hear us talk about this from time to time because, and those of you who are teachers, right, you understand there's a teaching aim. And understanding that aim becomes really important to understand what the teacher's trying to do. So what Jesus is not trying to do, his aim is not to teach technique. And sometimes we think of this, and so it's easy to read this and say, okay, so the technique here is you can't pray where anyone else will hear you, right? That's not a good thing. It's not what he's saying, right? Otherwise we'd be like, well, we shouldn't pray in church because other people could, hear us praying. That wouldn't be, well, no, I think I think God is delighted when we pray at moments where other people can hear us. There's something else he's getting here. And some of you are going, oh, that's a bummer, because that part where he said about, not going on and on and on, because, Dad says grace at dinner and he just drones on and on. And now I have a verse for Dad on that. Sorry, won't work. But right, he's getting at something else here that I want us to understand. So here's what I'm going to do with the rest of my time. There are two things that he's going to point out that he's wanting to pull us away from, that he's saying this is not the kind of prayer that I engage in, or that I want you to be pulled into. And then he's going to give us a really important insight about prayer. And I think this is an insight that you will see that Jesus holds in his own prayer life, and he wants us to have. And then I want to just take the rest of our time after that and look at a couple of practical ways to live out this insight that Jesus is going to unpack in this passage. So let's start with the two things that he kind of points out that this is not. And he uses these two groups to point these out, right? He talks about don't be like the hypocrites, and he says don't be like the pagans. So let's look at the hypocrites here right off. He's probably talking about like a religious approach. Oftentimes he would use that when he would talk about hypocrites. And he's talking about like there's this thing that goes on where prayer is more about, you see it as a mark of your spiritual life. You're praying because it becomes this outer way of projecting whether or not someone is like spiritual or not. Like if you pray really good, that must mean you're really spiritual. But that's all about something about the people around you in this. And he's saying like, that's not what prayer is about. Have you ever noticed at moments, and maybe, I say this as a confession as well, okay? So like, I'm gonna point out what I can be pulled into oftentimes. Ever find yourself praying and suddenly your voice becomes a little bit more spiritual? The baritone starts coming out in there, because we all know, that voice is so much holier than our normal voice, right? Yeah. And we'll find ourselves praying that way, right? What's going on there? Well, it's a little bit of this. And here's the thing. It's not the end of the world to have more of a prayer voice. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's just, that's not what prayer is about, right? That's what he's getting at in this. The goal of prayer is not to get good at prayer, right? In the sense of making it well polished and using the right kind of words and the sentence structure and the tone and everything. Right? It's, in the end, Jesus is saying, don't make that your prayer life. That's not what prayer is about or like. Ever feel like there's moments like you need to pray well about something, right? Ever find moments where like you're the one that's asked to pray and you feel, and it's just like, okay, I want to get this right. Well, sure, like that's going to happen. We're all going to feel nervous about moments like that. And I think what Jesus is trying to say is like, so don't worry about that, because that's not what it's ultimately about. There's something more to all of this that is important. It's interesting, there was a study done a while back and looked at Christian college groups. And just, it kind of analyzed, what they did in these groups. And there was something that came out that they did not expect, and it happened around prayer. And it only happened with prayer. When they were, like if it was a teaching time or an activity time or a sharing time or just a social time, like this never happened. But during prayer times, this became like this ongoing thing, and they saw it at multiple universities. And it's not just with Christian college students. And here's what they noticed, is that there was a particular sound that people were making when they would pray, and it was this. And they would be praying, and Lord, Lord, it's so good to just be here with all these Christian brothers and sisters, and we lift up, and it was this little weird sound, and I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I do that. And sure enough, the researcher nailed it. There's this thing that we could do where it's like, if I wanted to just be extra serious and just like I'll add this little sound to it. And that's just extra sincerity coming out in that sound, right? And again, if you do that, no big deal, right? It doesn't make you a bad Christian. God's not like, how many are you gonna put in this prayer? It's okay. But the point is, it doesn't make it, a more spiritual prayer to have it in there. It's this thing where we're like, we feel compelled to do something that's extra spiritual in it, right? And what Jesus is saying is like, I don't want you to go down that path thinking that is what prayer is about, because ultimately that'll keep you from a kind of prayer life that is an ongoing, just simply being present with God in a unique and special way, right? So now he points out something else in all of this. And that first one, right? The goal of prayer is not to get it right or to make it polished. And then he goes on and he talks about not to pray like the pagans. Look back at the passage. Look at verse 7. It says this, and when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words, right? And this one, it holds this notion around prayer where there's like this felt disconnect with God. Like, I have these cares in this world, and God doesn't share them with me. And part of what I'm gonna do in prayer is I want to get God to care about the thing I care about. I've got to move God in caring about what I care about in this. And so there's this way of praying. I'm gonna say all these words and I'm gonna get God to care about what I care about. What's interesting is Jesus goes on right after this and it's just like, and by the way, God already knows what matters to you. He already knows your needs and your cares. Like, be at peace with this. But the other part of this sometimes is we'll feel this need to appease God. Like, okay, there's something that maybe God knows what I care about, but in order to get him to help me, there's something I have to do in my prayer life that will move God to act. It's kind of like God saying, well, I don't know. Let's see how good this prayer is. And if you pray it good enough, you put enough in there, then maybe I'll help you out. We'll see, right? And you know how that gets worked out most often with us? Have you ever done this? I just made that sound. So pay attention. We'll do this through making like a promise to God. Ever made like a promise with God? Like, okay, God, like I promise, like I'll get control of this sin if you'll just help me out. Or God, I'll volunteer. I'll volunteer to do something I really hate because I know you probably really love that, but please help me out, right? You've heard all the stories. I remember growing up as a kid and hearing all the stories. There's some guy going down in a shipwreck and he was just gonna die for sure. And he makes God a promise. God, if you save me, if you keep me from drowning, I'll go live someplace and be like a missionary to some land that where I'll be miserable for my whole life. If you'll save my life now, I'll be willing to be miserable for most of my life. If you save me now, I promise. And it's like this deal making with God. And sometimes we get this notion that like God's after that if there's something I really need, I can make a deal with God. And if I'm really sincere about it, then maybe God will help me out. And notice it's always something we feel like will make us miserable or something that like, okay, I'll care about that or I'll do this thing that for no other reason than to get you to help me. And that's the thing he's getting. He's going, if you think about your prayer life that way, right? Prayer is not about crafting a deal with God. If that's how you think about your prayer life, you're not gonna be real motivated to engage in prayer unless you're like, well, I need to talk God into helping me out with this one. I've reached the end of my ability to handle this, and so now I'm gonna have to make a deal with God to work this out. He's saying, like, don't go to that place, right? That's not the goal of prayer. It's not to appease God. It's not to make a deal with God. It's not to get good at prayer. It's something else. And so what I want you to notice here, I want us to look now at this insight that Christ gives us, right? He's kind of guided us away from what he doesn't want us to think about prayer as being. And now he wants to give us this insight for how to think about prayer. Look at verse 6. He says this. Here's the insight. He says, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." Now, again, this is not about technique. This is not about, so I've got to go into an enclosed space to pray. Like maybe the vortex of sound or something in an enclosed space. So, God hears it. No, this is not technique. This is not, you're not allowed to let anyone else hear what you're praying. There's something else going on in this that becomes real important. Because he's pulling us out of the weirdness, right, of prayer that is crafted for those other reasons, like the hypocrites and the pagans, to understanding something else. And a little bit of background here. So when he says, go to your room to pray, that would have been a little bit of a weird statement in his day, because in most homes, no one had their own bedroom. When we think about going to your own room, we resonate with that. We've got our own room. We think of our bedroom or something like that. In the first century, most of these homes, all the rooms doubled as things for multiple spaces. And usually there weren't doors on any of the bedrooms or something like that. Oftentimes the only interior door would be to a closet or a storage room or something. That's probably what he's referring to here. It would have been a communal use. So when he says, go to your room and close the door, part of what he's saying is make a space, create a space for something in this. You need a room, you need a space here. And I think this is real important. Let me ask you this question. Think for just a moment, what is the favorite room in your house? What is your favorite room in there? And the reason I ask this is there's actually been a lot of research done on this over the decades. What is the favorite room of we Americans? And there was a big study done back in 2008. And anyone have a guess? And back in 2008, what did Americans say was their favorite room in the house? Any ideas? Kitchen, yes, the kitchen, that's right. Now that changed. There was a study done in 2019, and part of the reason they said the kitchen was that became the communal space. It became the space that people just kind of naturally gravitated to, where relationships and all this stuff happen. And in 2019, the kitchen was edged out by the living room. And again, they described it in the same way. And my theory is it probably has something to do with giant flat screen TVs. It just pulled us away into the living room, But it was because it was kind of this communal space, and friends and family would be in that space. Now, here's what's really interesting. Although in the survey, when you looked at more isolated groups like dads, the living room was actually second for dads. Their favorite room was the bathroom, right? That was their space. Now, in 2020, they repeated this study because of the pandemic. And in less than 12 months, there was a major shift that they discovered. In fact, the living room dropped by 20% among Americans as their favorite room. Any guess as to what room became number one, skyrocketed? Yes, the bedroom. Unless, and again, this is a smaller demographic, unless it was a mom with young children. And then it was the bathroom, because you go in there and you can lock the door, right? Just, retreating further away to get your own space. Yeah, which probably creating marital problems all over the place, because now men are their bathrooms being invaded by their wives. But we can settle this, right? Women, you get the tub, men get to keep the toilet, right? That's just how it should work out, right? Okay, now, Here's why. Here's what they said in the survey, is the motive for why they wanted this space changed, okay? A couple of things that were said. There were a couple of dominant things that came out in this, if I can find, okay. So the second most common phrase used was, I needed a place to de-stress. Because like everything going on with the pandemic and all the change, there's all of this anxiety and stress and pressure. And people were saying, I need a place to de-stress, right? The number one reason given was this, which I find, you'll love this. Number one reason was, whatever hides me from my family. The bedroom is my favorite room because it's what hides me from my family. Don't miss, though, what's happening with this. What they're describing in this is this need for refuge, a safe place, a place, it's like all of this stress, and I've got to be on, and I'm dealing with all of these things, and it's like so many of the things happening out there are kind of invading our space, and you're dealing with all this, and it's just like, I need a safe place to de-stress where I can be me. Right? That's what's going on here with this. And the reason I bring this up is because I think that gets close to what Christ is talking about when he says, go to your room and close the door, right? We often read this. We read this with a lens that Jesus is saying, okay, you go to your room. You need to be praying. You haven't been praying in a while. You need to go to your room and you need to pray, right? For whatever reason, we kind of naturally want to go to that place. But when you look at the actual language structure here, it actually very clearly points to something very different. In fact, this verse starts off with this simple phrase, sude hoten. And it's this very particular little phrase in Greek, especially the sude, and it carried a very particular tone, right? And what he's saying with this is, and you could translate it directly as, but when you, okay? But it takes it in a weird order, and it always carried a sense of empathy. In fact, you see this in a few other places in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus uses this very particular sentence structure that invokes empathy. It would be the equivalent of, in English, if somebody said something to you and your response was, ah, right? Just that simple, it's not even a real word, but we all know what it means, don't we? If someone looks and goes, ah, you would read that as like, oh, this person is empathizing with me on this. They're feeling something with me in this. So when Jesus says, but when you pray, he's going, oh, when you pray, go to your room. Find the space that you make your space. Because you need a safe place. You need to experience a connection with God where it is not about trying to establish who you are spiritually with people around you. Isn't it nice when the pressure's off on that? Where like you can engage and just be present with God, and there's a sense of just like, it's my refuge. I don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks about how well I pray or how many I put in each sentence, or just like, I just get to be me in that moment, right? And it's a safe space in that you're not having to move God to care about what you care about. In fact, he goes on, he says, remember, God already knows what you need. God already cares about what you care about. Like, enter your room, and that's just a given. See, do you feel the difference? Jesus, I think he understood prayer is being in the presence of God, and being in that presence, there was no place safer. to be who he was. There was no place safer to face the struggles that he faced on this earth, right? There was he was drawn to it, right? There's passages where Jesus would go out and pray all night. And we read those passages and oftentimes we go, wow, okay, I'm the Messiah. So I guess it'd be really spiritual of me to pray all night. How many people do that? Okay, I can do this. I'm gonna go pray all night. And we think of it as wow, that's a super spiritual thing and that'd take a lot of work. And how do you think of enough stuff to pray about all night? Because I run out after a few minutes and then I'm trying to think of stuff and I keep a list and I just don't think Jesus approached it that way. I think in the same way we go, I need to get into a space where I can just decompress. I need to be in a space that is safe and where I can just relax and be. I need that spot. The way you're drawn to that, I think Jesus was drawn to prayer. And so praying all night, that night, I think that just made all the sense in the world to him because that's just what his soul needed. And you know what? I think your soul needs to have moments where you feel a connection to the ever presence of God in a way that you experience it as there is no place safer for you than to be with God. No place safer to be who you are. See, that all of a sudden, prayer is the thing that you go to. It's a way of being, not the thing that you do. So can I just take a few moments and talk about maybe some practical ways to engaging that kind of prayer? Two things about engaging that kind of prayer. First one is this: when you pray authentically, right? Don't try to filter it. Oftentimes we think about prayer and it's okay, I'm allowed to say that to God? Just be real. When you pray authentically. And maybe two ways to get at that. And I'm gonna be real practical and I'm actually gonna talk about technique. And for all my talk about, this isn't about technique, okay, it's not about technique, but sometimes technique can serve to get us to the greater thing. So as I say this, don't take this as okay, that's what it's supposed to do. Just take it as something to maybe try that actually helps you experience prayer as a way of being present with God. So one way of praying in a very authentic way, change your posture, right? So often we have these scripted ways. Prayer needs to be in the morning. Prayer needs to be, I'm sitting, head bowed, eyes closed, right? Unless I've got my prayer list and then I can look at my list and then my eyes need to close again. That is great. But you can do it a lot of different ways. There's moments where Jesus is eyes open, looking up and praying, right? That change your posture, change your way, only because maybe it will do something in your brain that actually breaks you out of a rote or system of something that's holding you back from being as authentic. Can I just share with you, me personally, one of the ways that has become the most potent thing that I have experienced in my own prayer life of just connecting with God in one of the most meaningful ways, and this may sound strange to you, but is when I am running or hiking. I can be, I think back over the last 10 or 20 years, some of the most profound times of prayer that I have had have been when I was out running, right? And I don't understand it. There's probably something that it has to do with your brain and running or something like that. I've also experienced that out hiking. I've missed a trail junction at different moments out hiking. So I almost got lost because I was just having a great moment with God and just, but try something different. Try praying at a different time. Try praying during an activity. Change your posture and just see if it doesn't change something in your mind, and all of a sudden you just find yourself being more real with God. Another way of praying in a very authentic way is if you find yourself at moments going, well, I want to pray some more, but I feel like I've run out of things to pray about. Use questions. Use questions that stimulate something in your mind to process. And the reason I say this is because in the modern Christian world, we have lost the art of the psalmist. right? You go back and you read the psalmist and you realize these psalms are like prayers being poured out, but they're being poured out over these profound questions of the human soul, questions that they've asked about their lives. And out of these questions, right, there's been this kind of introspection that they're going through that is a part of that prayer or that psalm. And again, when I say we have lost the art of the psalmist in our day, it's that we have lost the art of introspection. And to lose introspection, like few things will put a ceiling on your spiritual growth faster than to not know how or engage in introspection of your own soul and your own life. Profound things happen when we can take time to introspect. Make that a part of your prayer. So let me just give you a few practical questions you could ask. You can come up with your own questions. Here are a few questions that I wrote down. What am I hanging on to? Sit down and say, God, what am I hanging on to? And then just start to think about that. Is there something, am I hanging on to anything? Like, are there any behaviors I'm hanging on to? Is there something like I feel threatened about and so I'm hanging on to this? Am I hanging on to something with my job or a particular relationship in some way? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Is it just as if God is with you and you're processing that question with the safest, closest friend you have in this world. And you might find that it just like you lose track of time, right? A couple of other questions. One is, what are my spiritual gifts? God, have you gifted me spiritually with an ability or something and I've missed it? Like, God, what have you wired me to do? How do I give myself away with my time and my talents in this world? If you've never thought about that, pray about that, ponder that, think through that. Two other questions. What do I catastrophize, right? What is it that hooks me emotionally and I just get wound up and I just turn the whole world into it's a catastrophe and everything because maybe there's something that you catastrophize when you run into it and you lose sight of God's beauty, God's power, and you get lost in some space that steals hope, steals encouragement from you. And what if you could spend some time and say, it's kind of funny, when this happens to me, I throw little fits, I get all crazy, I catastrophize, and all of a sudden, if you can begin to see that, all of a sudden it's like, God, could you be with me the next time I get all wound up? And maybe you wind me in a different direction with that, see? And around the question, you're processing this. Or, what energizes me? God, what is it that fills my heart with passion and energy? What is it that I care so deeply about? Like, what is it and why did you do that in me? Process who you are with God. There is no better being to process the deepest, most in parts of who you are than God. And you might find it interesting because it's about you, right? It's just, you might find yours, like I've prayed for I lost track of time praying because you were praying about something that mattered to you. You want to kill your prayer life? Try praying about something that doesn't matter to you. And it's just like, oh, okay, I can last one more minute, right? It's just, yeah, right? Okay, one more practical thing of prayer, and it's this. When you pray to be with, just to be with God. And in two ways here. One, just when you just share your day with God the way you would with a friend, right? Just think about what were the things that brought you joy? What were the things that brought you fear? What were the things that made you laugh, right? Just like, think about God being present with you all of the time. He was with you in that. Like, just take time sharing that. Speak to God about what you went through. I think Jesus had a lot to say when he spent all night praying with God. When he got up early in the morning, right? There were things that he prayed about, relationships that mattered to him, people that he cared about, right? Now, the other side to that, right? Pray for the things that matter to you. But prayer is both ways. It's conversational. So be open to what God might be wanting to say to you. And if you're like me, I understand this in theory, but it's in practicality that I miss it, right? If you were to ask me in theory, Glenn, do you believe there is room for you to grow, right? Are there beliefs that you have that need to grow? Are there behaviors that you need to grow in? Are there attitudes that you need to grow in? I'd go, oh yes, I've got lots of room to grow. But on the practical side, you know what's really easy for me to do? I'm working pretty good right now. I think all my beliefs are completely correct and my attitude is stellar. Right? It's just in a practice. I would never say that to myself, but in a practical way, it's how I'm behaving, right? Because if I'm not paying attention, I can just live in that space and miss what God might be wanting to say to me. When you pray, what would it be like to say, you know, God, is there something that I'm believing about you that you want to grow me in a little bit? Change, because we don't like that kind of change. God, is there something about my attitude that you want to work on, that you want me to see that I have missed? Just say, God, I want to be open to that. And begin processing what those might be and see what God puts on your heart. And all of a sudden you will find that prayer is less and less a kind of religious thing that you ought to do. And it becomes more a way of being. A way of being in a very safe place, right? The goal of prayer is to experience the presence of God as the safest place to be you. And I hope you begin experiencing God in that way more and more and more. Why don't you stand and I will close this in prayer. And if you hear it's me being human, right? Let me close this in prayer. Father, we just love the example that you gave us with Christ. And our prayer really is that you would grow us in seeing prayer as a way of being with you. And we would ask that as we go to pray more like your son, that we really would get to experience your presence in a meaningful way that draws us closer to you. And we pray all of this in your son's name. Amen. Have a great morning. See you next week.